Oh, hey, buddies. We are about to start a pretty quick thing here. Shouldn't take very long for our fourth lesson um, in this thing, Unit 4. And so we're going to talk about the way these maritime empires, how they got started and how they kind of worked. Maritime means by sea, and the two main kind of empires we're dealing with are um, land-based empires, which we talked about earlier, like all those Muslim empires, Russia, China, and now we're going to talk about the maritime ones. Remember on the last video, I showed you guys where different European powers took in the Americas. And so the first thing we're going to do is zoom in on Spanish colonies. So the important thing to know is there was a caste system, just like in India, and it was based on race. And these words here, the whiter the better. These are not my words, obviously. This is the idea of the way the system works, and the closer you were associated with the Americas, but even more than that, the darker your skin was, the lower you were on the social scale. So let's start from the top to the bottom. The first group is called the Peninsulares, named after the peninsula where Spain and Portugal are, the Iberian Peninsula. And these are people that were born in the pure, great, white continent of Europe. And they are actually above their children socially. So the socials, the children are socially known as Creoles. And Creoles are the children of these peninsulares, but they are a lower status. And what we're going to see is when revolutions start to boil up in Europe, in Latin America, a lot of times it's led by Creoles. Then you have mestizos. Mestizos are a mix of Europeans and natives. And there's a lot of mestizos in Latin America. Then you have mulattoes. Mulatto is not a word we use today to describe people who are part white and part black. It's like not a nice word to use, so don't use it. But in the system, that's what the Spanish called them, and that's part European, part African. And then we get down to the indigenous people. The indigenous people are people who were there when they got there. And it looks like, I can't remember on the next slide if I talk about slaves or not. So let me put that in there too. On the very bottom are slaves. And so they are African slaves, and they are at the bottom of the social status. Same thing in the U.S. As well. Okay, so remember that coerced labor means forced labor. The first one we'll talk about is chattel slavery. The word chattel means property that you can move around. And so the slaves coming out of Africa were considered chattel slaves. Indentured servitude is when someone would come from Europe mainly, and they, for the boat trip over, they would agree to work so many years for the people that brought them. The encomienda system and the mata system are Spanish things, and basically these systems are the idea of, hey, we own the land that you're on. So your government gave us the land, the Spanish would say. Therefore, we own everybody that's on this land. And because you're on this land, you're forced to work here. That's called the feudus. That's like the feudal system. Remember that the Maida system is going to bring a lot of the silver mines in Potosi that we talked about yesterday. And another thing to think about is the word Maida means turn, such as take your turn. And the Inca had a Maida system before the Europeans showed up. And it was the idea that you would go and you would work on public works like building dams or building bridges. And every like adult male would give, 10 days a year for benefit of the empire. And so when the Europeans show up, they learn about the Maida system, and then they go and they switch it and basically turn it into slavery. And then you may have heard of Tupac Shakur, rapper from the early 90s. Well, his mom was really into social justice. And she decided to name her kid Tupac after the last free emperor of the Inca Empire, Tupac Amaru. And this was an uprising in Peru that the Spanish ended up quelling. However, it's still something to know when people rise up against their oppressors. So this is a table that I'll briefly go over, but what we're comparing here is the way plantations worked in Brazil and the Caribbean, and the way they worked in British North America. And when you'll notice I don't just have Latin America here. So I'm not saying that there weren't slaves in Mexico and there weren't slaves in the Inca Empire, because they were, but slavery is much more prevalent in Brazil and the Caribbean. So in British North America, only 5% of the population were slaves, but look at Brazil and the Caribbean, 80%. And you see the crops are different: sugar for Brazil, tobacco and cotton for British North America. Slavery is more harsh in Brazil and the Caribbean, and that's not saying that slavery is not harsh in the southern U.S. It's just less harsh. There's a lot of racial mixing that happens in Brazil and the Caribbean, mainly because the Spanish people that came there did not come to move there, but they came to get wealth and get out. And so therefore they didn't bring their wives, whereas in British North America, they brought their wives. And so there's a lot less racial mixing. For racial mixing in Brazil and the Caribbean, it's going to make that system de la Costas, or it's just Costas, by the way. I messed that up yesterday. The system de Costas, which is the caste system. And in North America, British North America, it's if you have one drop of black blood in you, then you are black. That's the one drop rule. And so the death rate's super high in Brazil and the Caribbean, so they have to keep constantly bringing in slaves, where in British North America, it is they don't need they do bring in new slaves, but not at the rate that they do not at the rate that they do for the in Brazil and the Caribbean. And then finally, manumission. So manumission means freeing slaves. So in Brazil and the Caribbean, there is definitely instances where a slave would work their life, and then they would become set free. And that almost never happened in British North America. I'm going to hit the desk really quick so my lights come back on. Isn't that cool? So I really want to talk about sugar and how crazy it was. It's super hard labor, and the natives were there that were killed with the disease or they fled, and and sugar ends up being a really big industry. A lot of times, as Americans, we think of tobacco or cotton as slave industries, and they are slave industries, but sugar is way more prevalent. Um, so these are the Europeans that are running it: England, France, Portugal, um, and um, and the slave system is really plantation based, just like in the American South. Talked about more racial mixing, um, and then yeah, talked about that. So, what was the ethnic composition of Latin American societies? Um, in Highland Spanish America, that's we're talking about where the Inca Empire was in the Andes and the northwest part of South America. You can see that there's way more Native Americans there. And then over in Portugal, way more Africans, way more Africans. Um, so um, the thing is, when Columbus goes out 1492, Spain ends up getting the upper hand. They get Latin America, which has all the gold and all the silver, right? Um, but in England at the time, they're going through Henry VIII, and they have the British Civil War, and all heck's kind of breaking loose over there in England. So they don't have the time to go out and colonize. Okay, by the time we get England out trying to colonize, they can't get all the money that's down there in Latin America because Spain and Portugal has it. So where are they left? They are left to what they call the dregs. Only the dregs were left, is what our text says, and basically that's like they get the leftovers, and it sucks. For to differentiate between Britain and Spain slash Portugal. Like I said, these people are coming from England permanently. They're bringing their family. And a lot of it has to do, of course, with the kings and queens going Catholic, Protestant, Catholic, Protestant, Catholic, Protestant. And so the Massachusetts Bay Mayflower pilgrims are going to be part of that. But also, if you're trying to get away, that's a place to go. So the Europeans come in a much bigger numbers because they are there to colonize. They are there to move in, where the Spanish are just kind of trying to be in and out. It's not plantations. It's not agriculture. It's horticulture. It's just feeding yourself. Okay, where in Spain and Portugal it is, let's make that money, let's get these big plantations, let's mine. And so it's kind of a different setup. In British North America, it's hi, I want to come here and move in. Whereas in Spain, it's I want to get in and get out. And so that really explains why there's so much less rate. There's a lot less racial mixing in British North America because they're with their families, where in Spanish America, it's young explorer dudes out for an adventure, and there's a beautiful Native American woman. Let's see what happens, right? And remember, Native Americans make up 80% of the population, and there just weren't a lot of Spanish and Portuguese women that came to the Caribbean and Latin America. So think about that. Okay, Portugal. Portugal matters here, maybe for the only time in history, because we learned about earlier. It's all about them being first for your boy Prince Henry the Navigator. They first make money on what we call the Gold Coast, which is the northwest coast of Africa, and then they keep going south. Vasco da Gama gets around the tip of southern Africa. That's called the Cape of Good Hope. And then we get, remember, Da Gama, Da Gandhi, meaning Vasco da Gama is the first European to reach India. By boat, by ship, I guess. And we start to see trading post empires. And this is how Portugal gets rich. They basically go to all these coastal cities around the Indian Ocean and they say, hey, we've got guns, we've got horses, we're controlling the trade here. We're controlling all the spice, all the sugar, all the textiles. Everything that's coming out of this city that the indigenous people used to have, the Africans, the Indians, the Arabs, the people in Indonesia. Now we're running it, and so it's kind of like somebody coming to your house and setting up a yard sale, but they're selling your stuff and they're getting the money, and that happens all the way around. One thing that comes up on AP exams a lot is the line of demarcation, and basically this is the Pope telling Spain and Portugal to chill out. So think of Spain and Portugal as two kids in the backseat of a car, and they just keep slapping at each other, and they can't keep their hands to themselves. And the Pope is like, "Don't make me turn this car around." And so what he does is he says, "Okay, I'm making a line. You stay on this side of the line. You stay on this side of the line." And the way it ends up looking is Portugal gets half the world and Spain gets the other half. And so, of course, Portugal doesn't, go into Saudi Arabia or whatever. But Portugal does get the Indian Ocean and technically all of Africa. You don't think of Spanish people running, taking over a lot of power in Africa. The thing I want to highlight here, though, is this little tip of South America. And so the Portuguese really lobbied for them to keep that land. And so today, Brazil is still so culturally Portuguese. And had the line been drawn differently, maybe Mexico would be speaking Portuguese. Or maybe the Spanish would have taken over India. A lot of things could have happened, but the line of demarcation is Spain, you get this half of the globe. Portugal, you get the other half of the globe. And we'll talk in more depth in the future about how the Protestants, by the way, Latin America, Spain and Portugal, Catholic, right? But British North America is mainly Protestants. And the Protestants, remember, come from Luther. And one of Luther's big arguments was anybody should be able to read the Bible. Okay, and so that leads to across Europe this idea in Protestantism that you need to learn to read because here is God's word, and we're hardcore Christians, so learn to read so you can read the Bible. Where down there in Spanish Latin America, that's not so much the case. Now, I'm not saying all Catholics are illiterate or anything like that, but there was a much bigger emphasis on the Protestants in the Bible. And so what happens with Britain is that they get really independent because a lot of crap is going on in England. The British Civil War is going to be something that they have to deal with at home. And so they have these colonies over here basically doing whatever they want. Once the British Civil War gets over and they get George II or Fourth, or I hate American history, the bad guy in the American Revolution, he he kind of starts thinking more about the Americas and the colonies, and starts pressuring them, and that leads to the American Revolution. And so once there is a revolution in the United States, we see a big power shift. And the U.S. is getting really rich and powerful. And Mexico and the Andes um, are not, okay. And so before the Europeans arrive in North America, it's a lot smaller. There's less agriculture. There's less population, and in Latin America, there's a lot bigger population and powerful. But when the Europeans show up, especially after the American Revolution, that switches. Okay, I promised to have a short lesson today, and this is a short lesson. Remember to, if you're checking this out before Friday, sign up for the ACT. The ACT is in February, not April, like I said before, but you have to sign up by Friday at midnight. And hope you guys have a good weekend, and I'll see you soon. Bye.